Phil Phails. Whoa, Phil Phails. Welcome to Phil Phails. My name is Philip Jones, and today I'm here with Anita Robertson. She is LCSW. I'm here with Anita Robertson, LCSW. She is an author and ADHD relationship therapist. She wrote the book ADHD and Us, A Couple's Guide to Loving and Living with Adult ADHD. Wave to everybody. Anita, they're inside those cameras.
Which camera do I look at?
I don't know. That one and that one are the ones that'll pick up you.
Okay.
And today, Phil fails at relationships. Romantic relationships, to be specific. But these types of tools and practices apply to any kind of relationship. Right?
Yes, for sure. The stuff that I work with and kind of the guide is good for friendships, for family relationships, for kids, all of these things. However, my area of expertise and what I tend to work with more is adult romantic relationships.
Yeah. So today, Phil fails at relationship.
Yay. Exciting.
Let's get into Phil fails 5 questions.
Okay.
First question. How would I fail as an ADHD man in relationships, in romantic relationships?
Okay. So normally this is where it happens is as your relationship time goes on, right? We're talking about more executive functioning demands. And the older we get, the more executive functioning demands are. Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot of the challenges are with ADHD that are very unique, but make sense when you understand the brain and body science behind it. But in the beginning of the relationship, normally ADHDers can shine unless there's a lot of that relational trauma that we just talked about. But, you get the hyper focus. You're very excited. You're very attentive. There's a lot of different ideas. Maybe you do lots of different activities, all of these different things. There's a lot of novelty to it. And so oftentimes people will say when they date an ADHDer is like, I've never felt so loved. I've never felt so connected, all of those things in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then as the relationship progresses, if you're progressing in the traditional, which is not saying that's the right way to do it, but this is just the more common way, mm-hmm. the traditional path where let's say you then maybe plan a wedding, right? Buy a house, have kids. And then all of a sudden you also are dealing with your midlife, aging parents, taking care of aging parents, taking care of your own health issues or your spouse's health issues or all of those things. And so when you look at that, and executive functions are like the ability to do stuff, right? Organization, planning, all of these things. And when you have unsupported ADHD, untreated, unsupported, like the workarounds that you might have had to have a very successful career or do these other things, I kind of talk them like Jenga blocks, like a tower. Mm-hmm. And so like you just, because if you didn't get a guide, if you didn't get that support and like plastic cover, you kind of just start like, okay, figuring it out. And you kind of build a tower that's really cool and pretty functional, but might not be the most stable, right? Where everybody else who society provides at least adequate enough tools has more of a stable foundation. So then when you're getting into more of these executive functioning like overloads and you don't have the right treatment, your tower kind of crumbles a lot faster and it's harder to rebuild. And so what you look at in relationships of where you fail, right, which isn't really failing, it's just environment and everything is like not really supporting you in the way that you deserve is that there's like these misunderstandings in these stories. Okay, well, wedding planning, right? That's normally where it starts of like, what? Well, why can't they do this? Why can't we send out the invitations or those little boring things or the things you have to do in advance? And then they're like, well, do they even want to get married or does this even happen? And so normally in this like first kind of team experience where you're doing something that's out of your norm, because most people aren't like event planners, right? So you're doing something that both of you are learning and growing. It has this big like symbolic meaning to it. And so that's normally where these things of like, hold on, what's going on? Like where that mismatch of not understanding what executive functioning challenges look like in ADHD and how to like support them in the relationship. That's where it starts breaking down. And then, if you buy a home, not that anyone can do that in this market, at least in Austin anymore.
Oh my
but
goodness.
back in the day when you could buy a house here for not that much money, then it's like house maintenance and all these other things. And so when you don't know how to prioritize the thing that's far ahead and isn't urgent and crisis, because that's not where the ADHD brain thrives, you start to have bigger consequences, right? Like, then the AC breaks in the summertime or like your water heater, or all these things where preventative maintenance might have, increased it, or the life. And then you're dealing with paperwork and insurance and all these things that I call like ADHD kryptonite, like where our brains just like kind of like just freeze.
It's kind of like the increased complexity of your world is what I'm hearing. As the life and the shared life.
The shared life and the way that because also the US has so little social supports and services compared to most other like wealthy nations, the demand is always on the individual or the family structure. And so as these demands increase and they kind of peak in midlife, right? So all of these other stressors, and that's where you try to, like, if you're using the same tools, like, okay, well, I know I can just get it done. Like, I'll just wait, and then it's the last minute and I'll get all these things done. But everything else has all these consequences. Your kids' schedules, not signing up for summer camps. Because like here in Austin, why do we need to sign up for summer camps in January or earlier? And then they're full. So like there's a lot more consequences that maybe when you're in your 20s or even early 30s that you didn't have. And then that can be stressors on the relationship, right? Because it's not just impacting the other person, it's impacting maybe their kids or whoever, if you're taking care of a sick parent or something like that, or animal, like the feelings get bigger and the stories they don't understand, right?
Yeah. And
so when I was doing a lot of couples counseling training, there's some really, really great ones out there and I really love them. But I just remember sitting with Sue Johnson in one of her trainings for emotionally focused therapy. And it was like really getting in and understanding like the meaning of the dirty dishes or the shoes on the floor or something like that. And I was just looking at that and I was like, this works really well for so many people. But like for ADHD, you can understand that this impacts your person and you don't want it to impact your person. But then either if you don't have the right tools and the right support and all of the things that like help you do the stuff that our brains are not really meant to do in this like daily mundane life, we excel in other areas. This tends to not be the thing unless we're hyper focused on it. It's our special interest. It's almost re-traumatizing. And so I think there's also a lot of therapies and other things out there that aren't really like neurodivergent affirming, like so many other things for any kind of oppressed or marginalized group that happens where it's just like this other person is being labeled bad, just like you said in the book that you read. And so it's this reaffirming, like kind of re-traumatizing pattern where I'm a failure. I can't do anything. I have to do everything for you. Why can't you do this? And then the saddest thing is that I see most ADHD couples, and this is generally talking about like ADHD and non-ADHD, because two ADHDers might have a lot more understanding for each other, but then they might also struggle in the same executive function area. So
like no one picks up those balls.
Yeah, they don't know how to do that. So like the principles are the same, but the supports and tools are a little different. But they both people work so hard. Like they'll come in and they're working so hard, but with all the wrong stuff, because that's all they're given. And it's so sad to see the impact that it has. And so I'm very glad that there's been a lot more awareness. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I'm like, it doesn't need to be this hard.
Yeah.
And I've really enjoyed working with couples that are coming in so much earlier. And it makes a difference. Like I was even rereading some of the scenarios in my book. I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't even seen this in so long, because people come in way before things get so like hurtful, because that's what it is. It's, it's these two people who love each other. They're trying really hard, but yet they keep on poking each other in these really big wounds. And it kind of gets this eggshell feeling. Mm-hmm. So that is a very long way of saying that's how generally, like, especially for an ADHD male, because also then you're totally not conditioned or taught any of the other executive functioning roles, right? Of that people expect a lot more of childcare, the mental load, housekeeping, all the other things that are women's work, so then you already kind of have a disadvantage with that too. Emotional intelligence, relationship connection, all of those things.
Yeah. You're kind of on your own to seek out and to grow those things. It's not necessarily,
Yeah, like you're kind of, you're penalized for it as a male growing up for the most part.
I got a quick question. Mm-hmm. Of the 3 ADHD types, I have a guess on which you are, but I'm wondering if you tell me. I'm going to write it down.
Okay.
Which one are you?
Hyperactive.
Yeah, you're hyperactive and impulsive?
Yeah. I don't know.
Those go together? Isn't it inattentive is one?
I mean,
2 is hyperactive and impulsive.
Change the whole criteria. Yeah. They do need to change the whole criteria. But yes, technically I am definitely in the hyperactive, which is more really it's because I have more of an under-responsive like sensory processing system. So I need more input, which is like that go, Tigger, Energizer Bunny.
Yeah.
To like
I got that.
Yeah. In order to kind of get that nutritional need of the sensory input for that. But yeah, no, I mean, I was the kid that was like twirling around and doing gymnastics every second.
Moving your body all the time.
All the time.
It was medicine.
All the time.
Okay. When couples' second question is, what kind of tools do successful couples use?
So what I talk about, I break it down into 5 pillars in my book. And I like that because it gives a compass and guide. So you don't have to be like, okay, well, how do I do this and this and this and this? Like all these things that you have to memorize.
And we need lists.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I like a list.
Yeah. And yes, you get 5 easy things to remember. But they're really kind of these core principles. So one of them is growth mindset.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about. The other one is praise, which can be controversial depending on how you were raised culturally and age. But unless you have a PDA profile, which is persistent demand for autonomy, or what it's technically called right now, pathological demand avoidance, praise really works.
Is that words of affirmation? Kind of from a love languages perspective?
Yeah. It praise. Okay. So
you're making no sounds. What is praise?
Well, the love languages. Oh, that one's like, that has a lot of controversy in that.
That's another subject.
Yeah, that's another subject.
Well, what is praise?
So praise, most people don't even know what high quality. Yes. For example, validation could be it. It can be words of affirmation. I would say, okay, this is like low quality praise. Good job. Yay, we did it. Woo! Right? Very generic.
Be specific with what it is someone did, to say like when you did X,
yep,
I felt Y, kind of a nonviolent communication approach to giving feedback.
That could be, that's feedback. But I think in the sense of when you're looking at, let's say, when you're looking at parenting, because you're a parent as well, what you're looking at when you're thinking of praising your child, what you're looking for is, yes, specificity. Yes. Consistent and very repetitive, right? A lot of times in your presence. And that it's also authentic. But the thing is, it's kind of like, I don't know, I have a young kid. And so like Kung Fu Panda 4 is out. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that because it will date this or something like that. But it's like in Kung Fu Panda 1, when they're training him and then they realize, oh, his brain works differently and he's motivated by food, right? Like what we call a dopa booster, right? And those types of things. And then all of a sudden he's like transforms and all this other stuff. But having high quality praise is so important. And when I'm working with older couples or mid-age couples, that, you don't have to learn new skills. If you want to do it for your kids, that's great. But like, if good job works for you, you don't have to be stressing out about it.
Yeah.
But that, leading with the positive. So when you come home and let's say the ADHDer, because there's 2 ways I see most of the time that ADHDers have learned strategies that work for them, is they do one of 2 things. They either imagine this really positive experience. So they go and they clean the kitchen and they do all these things and all this other stuff, and they're imagining their partner coming home and having this great response. Or they have, oh my gosh, they're going to get so mad at me. This tends to be the more common one. Oh, I'm going to get in trouble. All these other things, a lot of the stuff that they're probably given in their childhood experiences throughout life. they do that to stress themselves out enough to like kind of turn their brain on. But that has long-term side effects, right? Using stress, having high levels of like cortisol and the stress hormones and that type of thing. So when somebody comes home and you're thinking, okay, yes, I did such a great job. I worked so hard. And they're like, oh man, we didn't put these away again. Like that is so defeating. So having something which goes into that growth mindset, because you lead with the positive first, right?
That's what John Gottman said, the soft start.
Yeah. And so your part of that is like, oh my God, like, wow, this might have been like really, you put so much effort into this.
Or the hamburger.
Yeah.
Where you have the bun is positive and then you kind of put the meat is
well, I have I have a whole like ADHD communication guy that works really well for.
Is that in here?
No, it's too complicated to put in there, but it's in my courses. It is my courses because they do need to be fine tuned because there's so many trauma responses in there. But what I'm talking about for high quality praise is like looking at what it is and being very specific and authentic. And that tends to go a long way because when people are getting frustrated, it's like, oh my gosh, you left this out again, and ignoring all the other parts or starting off with that. Or even just that hello or this hug, it can be very physical too. Like your physical presence is really important.
Yeah.
But that's very reaffirming for that brain. And that is a great way. Like a lot of times that is the motivator, the dopa booster, right? The praise is the part. And so if you want something that's hard for an ADHD brain to do so, like where you're talking about these mundane, boring executive functioning tasks, giving that praise and recognizing those differences, that goes into the acknowledgement pillar that I talk about, because it is different.
Acknowledgement.
Like we are different, and our brains work differently. And so if you're wanting to do something hard, that reward is really important. There's this really big study, which I was like, when I started doing all the research, I was like, oh, this is why. There's a really important study that's talking about the default mode network. So the default mode network in ADHD brains doesn't turn off when the task network starts, right? And then so that's a little bit of like, this, if you have had a toddler, I think it's like, everybody's experience with a toddler. You can't do anything. You can't finish a full sentence. You can't do the dishes. You can't do anything before your kid either needs your attention or is putting themselves in danger or, having a breakdown because they wanted a green cup instead of a red cup, like all these things. But that's like kind of what the ADHD brain does in these mundane tasks. The default mode network doesn't turn off, but for kids, at least, because most of these studies are done in kids, so you apply them to adults, it did turn off when there was a high enough reward. And so you also see a lot of these high rewards. And that's also the interest base. We're also talking about intrinsic motivation. I'm not saying like, okay, give somebody like $5 every time they do something or your kid. That is not what I'm saying at all. But that high reward, which is praise, that relationship part, that high quality, authentic praise.
It builds intimacy and connection, relatefulness.
So it's just celebratory. So that's the thing is like when we do something hard, we celebrate. We do like, in my workshops, we'll have like everyone do like their own little handshake or a dance or something because you're building this skill in instead of being like, you just shouldn't get that or everybody shouldn't have a participation trophy or whatever it is,
Celebrate yourself.
Yes, exactly. And it works so much better because you're working with your brain and then also you're celebrating the things that are hard,
So growth, praise, acknowledgement. What are the other two?
Positive acceptance, right?
Positive acceptance.
And so that's just really humanistic psychology, of just loving somebody. But that's where boundaries come from.
That reminds me of like Carl Rogers' radical acceptance, or what he called unconditional positive regard.
Yep. That's where it comes from.
Or even Kristen Neff's self-compassion. It's like when you're down on yourself, like meet that with a lot of compassion, a lot of self-empathy.
Right. And so holding somebody else in positive regard means also, or positive acceptance, as I say, is like you're assuming good intent.
Yes.
Right. Like, you set out to say like, we are not trying to hurt each other.
Right.
And it's okay if things are different and challenging. So let's say one person struggles with time management, right? Like time is this very abstract concept. It tends to be something that's very challenging for ADHDers to manage. Setting those boundaries of saying like, hey, I get the fact that like this is going to be hard for you and this might always be hard. And when I work with relationships, most of the boundaries that you work on, there's a whole way to kind of do that. But like first they come with a lot of supports, right? what am I going to do that is going to help support you in this that feels good? And then when I set my boundary of like, okay, like I talk about this in my book, I'm going to leave at this time with or without you for these types of events, right? It might be like
setting expectations, setting clear.
And you talk about it ahead of time because you're just saying like, it's okay. Like this is who you are and that's totally fine. Right. And there is an impact on me, but that's where the boundary comes in of saying like, I can love you and accept you and understand that we're all human. We all have things that we
setting and managing expectations, having clear defined boundaries. And when you enact those boundaries, it's
you already
not done
know
from a place of anger, frustration. It's from a place of acceptance and like,
right. And you talk about it beforehand of just like, hey,
that's the setting and managing expectations.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And managing and well-defined boundaries.
Like well, and it's whatever the other person needs to hear.
Yeah.
That tends to be what they did not hear when they were a kid. So it's
yeah.
like, I love you no matter what. I know you're not trying to hurt me.
Yeah.
I did what I was supposed to do. I got to take care of myself, and this is about me showing up for me so that way I can show
up. Bad. It's about me honoring myself and my boundaries.
Right. And this really helps. This is one of the most important things to get out of the parent-child dynamic where one person's over-functioning and then the other person starts under-functioning or is like kind of treated like a kid. And so that's where that comes out. And then games, which is just play and novelty.
That's the fifth pillar? Games.
Yeah. So games,
having fun and play.
Yeah. And that's really important. That tends to be the first thing that goes when you're stressed in a relationship. But it's a human need for everybody.
Games.
But for ADHD, you really need it. You need that novelty. You need that fun. You need that playfulness. And it's a great way to work through like trauma responses that tend to get in the way from that relational trauma. I call it the criticism filter. I mean, RSD is also one of those things where people are like, whoa, I just made an observation and now like you're being defensive or you're giving me this very long explanation of why you didn't pick up the one thing at the store or something. And it can be very confusing for people.
Yeah. Question 3.
Okay.
And I might go quickly through these because I'm looking at time and this is all so, it can be a little bit like drinking from a fire hydrant. You have so much knowledge and I want all of it. I'm like, I should take all these notes. And I'm glad that the book is here because I can read through the book.
Nice. And
there'll be opportunities to expose myself to your content in the future as well, as will everybody else. We're going to make sure everybody can find their way to you.
Perfect.
Third question is like, how did you find yourself? How did you make your way to this type of work, this way of contributing in the world?
So I think my relationship with my spouse is great. And I think that I've appreciated that plus all the other relationships in my life. And so I think that's why I was drawn more to couples counseling and also group work. Also, hyperactive ADHD, like you like more things in the room, the more action, the more things, the more puzzle pieces, all those things to navigate, which can be overwhelming for a lot of therapists. So I was really drawn to that. And then because I had ADHD myself, I would say I grew up, I think, for the ADHD part in really great environments that not everyone gets. So
you mentioned your spouse. Did you get into this after you were married?
No, I mean, I was.
Did you study
with
psychology
him
when you were?
Yeah, I mean, I was with him, and we didn't get married until we had a kid. We did like a commitment ceremony because like same sex marriage wasn't legal when we did that.
Was there a time in your life when you're like, this is my purpose, this is my mission to kind of support folks with ADHD?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
I think everybody's different. When I was really into the couples counseling world, like, and I was like, reading all the books and trying to take all the courses from like Tatkin, Esther Perel, Sue Johnson, like, I was ADHD fashion. I wanted to go everywhere. Terry Real.
Yeah.
So I was like going to all their
Terry
trainings.
Real.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Terry Real.
Yeah. He's good for it. And they all bring something that's really important. I think it's great because I know how to refer out too, where I'm like, this would be the therapy the model that would probably work better for you.
So you were really into couples therapy.
I was really into couples therapy. And then, for ADHD, when I became a mom, which now I understand why, that's where I was like, whoa, like I was pretty I had a very ADHD great life. I didn't realize it at the time because even then, we didn't know that much. Like, I think when I got my diagnosis, it was like, oh, you can try medicine or this, but there was no real explanation. There was not a lot of like executive functioning supports, none of those things. So anyways, like when I was struggling as a mom, which I now know a lot more reasons why that is, I was more going into like, okay, well, I need some extra help. Like this is what the heck, And so I went to some other trainings for ADHD at the same time that I was doing all these other things. I tried medicine for the first time, which I was like, oh, I could see how this would have been helpful.
Was this before you were a social worker, a licensed clinical?
No, I was a social worker
at this time.
At this time, yeah.
Quick question: when I hear a lot of like resonance in what you're sharing, and I'm wondering if your motivations were similar to mine. I found myself going deep into a lot of relational practices, some on a different track, like Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, the John Gottman stuff on the science of trust and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Other folks, whether it's Dan Siegel, interpersonal neurobiology, that type of stuff. And when I look back on it, I was trying to fix myself in order to make a relationship work. Did you ever find that? Like, I feel I had this thought that like, oh, if I just learned the right tools, if I just found the right framework or the right workshop, something would click in my brain and this relationship would start working better.
Aww. I would say
you just awed me.
I know.
Oh my God.
But that's
so motherly.
No, it's when you
me hard.
I just my heart like just breaks a little sometimes when it.
You never did that. I got a sense you never did that.
I don't think that was it for me, and I know when we go into that, I can explain more why. But I mean, it is that thing that there's something this message that you got that there's something fundamentally wrong with you, and if you can fix it, then everything will be okay.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And that really goes back to a lot of like kind of childhood trauma where you get stuck in that kind of like, okay, if this fixes this, then this will go there.
Oh yeah, my life I've been trying to figure out for a long time what practice, what workshop, what idea, whether it was neurolinguistic programming, DBT, CBT. Like I've gone through. If you looked at my worksheet on these, it's extensive. You've done
a lot. Okay.
A ton.
Okay. Well, then if you take my stuff, I'd be super curious on how, because it's very different because it's very ADHD focused.
Yeah,
and it's like, all the learning, which I have to talk to a lot. I do a lot of like science and research of movement and being goofy and silly.
You did
for the non-ADHD. Well, I think this is the thing. Like, I was maybe curious for other people in my life of why their relationships weren't working. I think I had some really great models, and I also had some very key people that were that's a protective factor, that like I was, I never was made to feel like less than and this is the other thing. Like, I think I have very rarely gone into neurotypical environments and worlds. Like that's just not been my reality almost ever. So I have a very different experience where sometimes when I hear other things, I'm like, or I go in these environments, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this, it's the opposite, right? I'm like, whoa, what's this world? This isn't fun. Why would I be here? So I think in that way, I was lucky enough, and I think it's really important to share that too, because I do think, as people worry about their kids and all these other things, there's so many different ways that you can do all these protective factors so that these messages don't impact them. And that way you're really working with their brains and bodies and celebrating it. And that's the whole point of what I do is like celebrating who you are, not you need to be fixed and you're the problem. That's like the crap that we're given, and it's not true.
Oh, I was the identified patient in the family. For sure.
Yeah.
It makes sense. I didn't realize it until you said that like earlier. I was like, oh yeah, that probably maps to being a de-identified patient.
Yeah. Yeah. Because then your family is like, okay, you're the one who's making all this
thing. And then the family's going to work out. And then no wonder I would think I need to fix myself. And then this relationship would work out. It's just what I was implanted from childhood. Rats. Question 4. Man.
I like the fact that you want to connect. We're like, we have the same experience. But I do think that's the thing is that when you're talking about these things, what I have seen that's better than individual therapy, right? Because in individual therapy, it's like you can get to this point. It's like, okay, now you have to do it with other people. It's like, okay, if they're too scared to do that, then it's like, okay, let's move to group therapy or these types of things.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, you only do so much in like an hour a week. And so if you're working with the people that you're living with and you're having an ADHD affirming environment at your home and in your relationships, it's like, it fills you. And it's so life-changing. And so I like that. I like the fact of having more or, you know, of being able to support in a relational way, because I'm very systems oriented. I'm very environmental oriented, not like, you know, you're the problem, so you got to fix yourself.
Yeah, family
you just
systems.
do these things.
Where acceptance.
And so I think working in that model is really important. And in the U.S. medical model, it's not as prevalent as like other countries that do like a lot more services for families and including them. And it makes a huge difference. And so I think that's why like I liked the couples work, I think because there was more of a dynamic there. And I also liked when it doesn't mean that everybody gets this when they go to couples counseling or relationship counseling. It varies, especially on what you're bringing and where you're at and all these things. But like when you're getting these parts of you that are healed and seen, and that's my favorite thing where it's just like, they still want to keep coming. And I'm like, whoa, look at you. Like, I'm just like, wow, look at this. This is great. This is, I mean, like, I love that. I love seeing things like click and change and people just staying so connected in conflict. And I think that's so healing. Relationships are the key to so much, to everything.
We're intrinsically social beings.
I know, even though we're supposed to be do it all yourself here. Like, you know,
I think that's this American kind of cultural thing of independence, radical independence.
I know. Like, we're still not relationally focused.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah. It's just, we have a lot of harmful messages around relationships too, you know, like, and all the things of how we idealize them. And, you know, there's love conquers all and all the myths that go in there. But no, I think that there's lots of different reasons, but I think that was the main one. And then because of my own journey, I started like, okay, learning a little bit more about ADHD, more stuff that I didn't really know. And then I was like, I need to start assessing for this in couples, right? And so I started assessing or adapting and tweaking it because I searched. I'm like, okay, what is the couples counseling method for ADHD? And I couldn't find anything. This is like over a decade ago. And so so anyways, like I started tweaking things, and then I think more people, you know, start getting referred to me. And that's sort of how I just kind of came into this niche, because I was like bringing it into the practice before it was there. And I also really love preventative work, right? Like, you know, so I do premarital counseling because also I couldn't find a good one for us, like a non-religious one for me and my partner at the time. And so I was like, I'm going to do this. And so I would see these people and I'm like, you don't need communication skills. You need like ADHD relationship skills. And that's where like I started the ADHD Relationship Bootcamp and all those other things that like really are more about changing your environment, staying in connection, getting these things versus like talking about problems when it's a lot more about how do you embrace these 5 pillars that I talk about. Yeah. And so I think the combination of that was like, kind of was the driving force of like the ADHD. Cause I was like, this is so sad. It doesn't need to be this hard. And like, you know, wanting to do all those things.
To bring in cognitive orientation into the discussion when couples or folks that are relating are asking for help. Having an awareness of, is one of them neurodivergent, or does one have ADHD, or does one of them have, that plays a huge role in who's trying to relate and what are their struggles, or what has their experience been like leading up to that point.
And I think adult ADHD is, it's not even really studied in most graduate programs like for kids. And I did used to work with kids, so I did get a lot more training in it. It is so dismissed, right? It's like normally it's like, it's anxiety or depression, which it could be. There's a lot of like what we call morbidities, but like co-occurring illnesses and other
conditions.
Yeah. So.
Okay, speed round, because I want to have enough time for the learning about you. Do you have a morning routine? What is your morning routine, if you have one?
Well, it's around my kid.
Yeah.
So wake up. I normally kind of get the food going. I definitely get coffee.
Are you an early bird?
Having a kid, I never was, but like his internal clock is so great. My internal clock is matched with his. So like I get up probably about 6:15 every day.
But you didn't used to sleep in.
Oh, before kids, oh my gosh, I had no routine at all. It was fantastic and also very confusing to people, which I didn't realize why that would be confusing. But I mean, you know, I always liked jobs that had flexibility so you could like, you know, maximize fun.
Right.
But yeah, so my morning routine, I would say, is like very kid focused. It's like getting his stuff ready for school, lunch, that type of thing. I eat, I go work out at like 7:30, and his dad takes him to school. And sometimes he joins me for the workout, sometimes he doesn't. And then I kind of come back and then just start my day, depending on what it is. So I have different modes to start up depending on what I'm doing. So if I'm just seeing clients, that's a very standard day. There isn't that much to prepare for. If I'm doing content creation or trainings or doing something else, I have my own system to kind of get my organization flowing and going.
Yeah. That's great. Question 5. Let's see. How does doing this type of work impact you?
Oh, I don't know if I think the last like 4 or 5 years have been so hard. I think there's a different impact that it would be normally. I think overall,
it's been so hard.
Yeah, I think, well, like the pandemic.
That's what I was thinking.
Well, yeah. Pandemic, personal stuff that has happened in our family dynamics, you know, with our family members, just so much horribleness. Like, you know, that's a huge list of all these things that either partly like I was shielded from, right, you know, of privilege and those types of things, but also just like really, really hard stuff. So I think in the sense being in it sometimes is really hard. I remember, you know, my husband's a software engineer, and I was just like, how do you guys just like go in and like, you know, he's like, I want to write some letters and numbers and have something work, you know, or it's like
the way a Muppet would do that job.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
what he does. Like goes
software engineers go
software
like
engineer.
Yeah, if I was one, I'd be like bouncing on a yoga ball, being like boom, boom, there, all this stuff. Yeah, it's up there. But I think the thing is like sometimes, depending on what it is, and I was also treating at the time, you know, a lot of ICU nurses, which is like really, really intense. Oof. So I think there's also this other part of there used to be more like ebbs and flows with like collective trauma. But now it's just really, there doesn't seem to be a break. I mean, there are little breaks and ebbs and flows, but I think there is a harder impact of like having that be a job that has changed so drastically, you know, from the first half of my career in this.
So there's a tidal wave of collective trauma that you're experiencing now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's been, I would say that. You know, because life is hard and other things are.
Life has always been hard.
Life is always hard, but there's like an information overload, right? We've
social media, the way we interact with devices, those kinds of things.
We see and hear all the horrible things in the world, not just in our local communities. You know, like. And we feel free to cut this out too, because I don't know.
Probably won't cut anything out.
Politics and stuff like that. But like our political system has changed. Like we have, you know, like the late stage capitalism, like all of this stuff, you know, I was watching on the spring break, I was watching the Hunger Games on the plane. I was like, oh gosh,
this is what
10 years ago. And we're just like so close to it. And it's just dystopian things, women's rights, like all of this stuff. Like,
oh yeah,
there's you know, and also too, just like, it's really hard. I think it's really hard. And climate change, all of these things where there's like real anxieties, like there's real anxiety in the world, and it's good. It's good to have anxiety because it's bad stuff is happening and we want to be angry because it motivates us to get out of our comfort zone. And sometimes I'm like, why aren't more people angry? Like we should be, because there is a protective factor in all of this, but it is kind of nonstop. Like when you look at least for me, I think the last 5 or 6 years, it's just felt like very, very nonstop without a lot of breaks. So I think this, in that way, like there's something that feels really good about providing support to others, because that's such a huge thing in a time of need. And I know a lot of people who were in the, other careers, they're like, I want to do something that's more meaningful and all these types of things. And I think there's just this, for a lot of therapists and people in the healthcare field, like a lot of burnout. And I think I definitely hit that a little bit and have, taken some time to like recover and those types of things. But I mean, it's just hard. Midlife's hard. Life has been really hard for us this last year. And that's just like in our, core unit. And so I think in some ways, like the job is great. And I think I get a lot out of it, is being able to learn in the things that I'm interested in, being able to apply it to my own life, to make my relationship better, to be a better parent, to all of these things. And then also too, being annoyed by it's like, I'm going to say this and I know I shouldn't do it. Blah, 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 blah. Like have a little attitude. And then I'm like, okay, that wasn't respectful. Take a deep breath, like come back. So I think there's like another part of it too, or knowing a little bit more, where it's just like, sometimes I'm like, okay, well, I need to check in with my kid like every developmental stage to make sure he doesn't get stuck in this, which is a great thing, but it's also like another thing to do.
Yeah.
So I think like overall, I do really like, getting to know other like experts in the area. I do really like to be able to train. I've started to do in-person trainings again, which is always my thing. I'm not really good at the technology part.
I love in-person training. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause I'm all about movement and outdoors and all these things that are so important to the work that I do. And so I'm still kind of figuring out how to move everything online. And I do think I'm doing a good job, because I've never seen a good job done for ADHD.
Yeah.
Right. And if there is, I totally would love to know, because I'd love to see what it looks like.
Heck yeah.
And yeah, so I think that is I don't even know. That was a very complicated question for me, because I think there's just a lot of weight to my life and to the world. And
you did a great job. I think that's a great answer.
Okay.
That is the end of Phil Phails 5 questions.
Hey, what do we win?
Yeah. Celebration. Celebrate yourself.